Alright, so the Champions League round of 16 is about to begin in just a few days. And since we're not doing this weird quarterfinal draw stuff, we actually have the whole bracket planned out in front of us right now, which means I'm going to predict the entire rest of the Champions League tournament from the round of 16 all the way up to who wins. As you can see, we have an incredible bracket of teams with some really tough matchups in there. I'm going to try to do my best to predict this with 100% accuracy, but God, it's the Champions League. There's always something unexpected that happens, but it's just impossible to predict that unexpected thing without looking, stupid. For example, in my last prediction round, I predicted Atalanta to absolutely smash Club Brugge. Pretty much the opposite happened, so there's bound to be some kind of crazy upset. I'm going to try to do my best to... Sorry, Brest, you're out. I'm going to try to do my best to predict these upsets, but we'll see how accurate I am. Let's not waste any time and let's start with PSV versus Arsenal. Now, PSV have had a pretty interesting Champions League campaign so far. They beat Juventus in the knockout playoff round, which I honestly didn't think would happen. I knew it would be a really close tie, but I thought Juve would get the win on extra time or penalties, and it ended up being PSV that won in extra time. PSV under the coach Peter Bosz has also beaten Liverpool this season, although that was a highly rotated Liverpool side. They're in a pretty bad run of form in the Eredivisie right now, though. They lost to PEC Zwolle, they drew 3-3 to NEC, with 2 last-minute goals conceded. They drew 1-1 with Willem II. They drew 2-2 against Utrecht, and they just lost 2-1 to the go-ahead Eagles in the Dutch Cup semi-final. They currently sit second place in the Eredivisie behind Ajax. Now, Arsenal have been a bit topsy-turvy in this point of the season. They just thrashed Man City 5-1, but then they lost to West Ham, and most recently drew 0-0 against Nottingham Forest. In terms of this matchup, I think Arsenal are just a little too solid for PSV. They have a lot more quality, and while I do like Peter Bosz's style of play and his attacking, free-flowing football, I just think Arsenal's defense is going to be too much for them, and Arsenal's going to pick up a pretty comfortable win over 2 legs. Okay, now into one of the really tough ties to call, Real Madrid versus Atletico. Now, of course, I, as the prediction master, have a bit of an advantage because these teams have already played each other twice since they're in the same league. They drew 1-1 most recently, but Real was the better team in that 1-1 draw. Real also looked absolutely incredible against Man City the other week. Mbappe is finally on fire. He scored a hat-trick. It's getting scary, and that seems to always happen with Real Madrid. They're a little lackluster, but when the Champions League knockouts roll around, they really hit their stride. Also, history goes Real Madrid's way. They always beat Atletico Madrid in the Champions League. I know Atleti fans are tired of losing to Real in the Champions League. I'm sorry, guys. I wish I could predict you going through, and it might happen. You've got some great difference makers now like Julian Alvarez, but you just can't bet against Real Madrid in this matchup in the Champions League. I'm going for Real to go through. Now, PSG versus Liverpool. Honestly, I think this might be the hardest matchup to decide of the round of 16. A lot of people will call Liverpool heavy favorites because they say, okay, well, PSG are in the French league, blah, blah, blah. And of course, Liverpool are on fire right now. But PSG have been on a great streak recently. Despite a few disappointments early on in the Champions League, they've now got the team clicking with Ousmane Dembele on absolute fire. He scored 23 goals in 29 games in all competitions this season. But if we're comparing Ousmane Dembele to Mohamed Salah, who's been the best player in the world this season, it's not that much of a competition. However, those are 2 key difference makers, and I say which of these 2 performs better is probably going to decide the matchup. While I wouldn't write off a PSG upset here, I just have to go with Liverpool winning over 2 legs, but I could see some kind of cool, crazy comeback thing where PSG win the first leg at their home ground, and then Liverpool come back to get an even bigger win at Anfield. Now we go to Brugge versus Aston Villa, a bit of an underdog matchup here. This is a fun one. Brugge, like I mentioned earlier, had a huge upset against Atalanta. I was certain that Atalanta would go through. And I'd say that Atalanta are better than Aston Villa. Villa are on a pretty bad run in the Premier League. They recently lost 4-1 to Crystal Palace. To be fair though, Brugge also just lost in the Belgian league to Standard Liège. It's a bit of a toss-up, but again, I have history to help me with my prediction. They've already played, and it was at Bruges ground, and they won 1-0. One thing I'll say is that the combination of Unai Emery and Emi Martinez is pretty OP in a knockout competition, but Emi Martinez did pick up an injury against Crystal Palace, so that could affect Villa in a negative way. I think I'll go with Club Brugge's momentum here and favor them to go through and do another upset. Sure, it's an unexpected result. I bet most people would predict Aston Villa to go through, but there's always upsets in the Champions League, so I gotta predict a few of them. Next, we have Benfica versus Barcelona. I think this is a pretty cut and dry one. They already played and it was one of the most insane games you'll ever see, Barcelona winning 5-4. I think this tie will be just as crazy, but I just have to bet on Barcelona to go through. They're just star-studded, incredible attack, great all around. A lot better than Benfica. Sorry, Benfica. Now we have Dortmund versus Lille. I think this is a tie where a lot of people will probably predict the upset in Lille to go through here, just because Dortmund have been pretty much the most inconsistent team in the world right now. They just lost 2-0 to Bochum, then a week later they just beat Union Berlin 6-0. One thing that's boosting this in Dortmund's favor for me is how convincing they were against Sporting. Lille have had really solid results in the French league lately against Rennes and Monaco, beating both these teams 2-1, but they did also lose 2-1 to Le Havre, and they went out to Dunkirk in the French Cup. I could see this going either way, but I do favor Dortmund with their Champions League experience, and they have the top scorer in Guirassy. It's a hard one to call, but yeah, I think Dortmund will go through, and honestly, that could be considered a bit of an upset in itself. Okay, now we have Bayern Munich versus Leverkusen, the top two teams in the Bundesliga right now. This is another pretty tough one to call, but again, they've already played each other this season, 3 times. They were all tight games, but Leverkusen did manage to win in the DFB Pokal, and they also dominated Bayern a couple weeks ago, but they couldn't grab a goal, and that game ended 0-0. In terms of coaching and strategy, I really do favor Alonso over Vincent Kompany, but Bayern just have that European experience, so it's really hard to bet against them. But then again, Bayern didn't really look all that convincing against Celtic. This is a really tough tie. I think the games will be just as tight as they've been all season, but I do have Leverkusen going through over 2 legs. So that's huge, one of the European giants and someone who you'd always consider to make it to around the semi-finals, and Bayern Munich, I have them going out in the round of 16. Okay, next up we have Feyenoord versus Inter. Feyenoord really surpassed my expectations by beating Milan, but now they go back to the San Siro for the final boss, Inter. Inter are just so solid right now, top of the Serie A. I'd be shocked if they lost to Feyenoord over 2 legs. Sure, they have had some shocking slip-ups this season, recently against the likes of Fiorentina, but Feyenoord, especially since they got rid of the manager that got them past Milan and replaced him with Robin van Persie, I just don't think they can give enough for an upset. I've got Inter to comfortably go through here. Alright, now we're into the quarterfinals. First off, we have Arsenal against Real Madrid. Last time these guys met in the Champions League, Arsenal did win, but that was when George Bush was president. This one's tough to call, but Arsenal in cup competitions this season have been pretty lackluster. They were eliminated by Man United on penalties in the FA Cup, and Newcastle pretty much wiped the floor with them 4-0 on aggregate in the EFL Cup. Seeing this and looking at the attacking firepower of Real Madrid compared to Arsenal's attack, I think there's really only one winner here. Arsenal are defensively solid, but I think Real will be way too much for them, and I've got them to go through to the semi-finals. Next up, you'd say we have about the best team in the competition now against the worst team in the competition at this point, Liverpool versus Club Brugge. Liverpool are huge favorites, while Brugge could go on a three-peat and do the biggest upset of all here. I just think Liverpool have far too much quality for them, and they'll absolutely dominate this matchup. I think it's going to be one of those that is going to be pretty ugly for Brugge, but congratulations to them for making it this far. Over to the other side of the bracket, we now have Barcelona against Dortmund. Again, these guys already met too. That's the thing with this league format. There's so many games, there's just a big chance that these teams have already played each other. It ended in a close 3-2 victory for Barcelona at the Signal Iduna Park. Dortmund did go on a really long streak of upsets in the Champions League last season, so it's possible that they could repeat that, but I just don't see history repeating itself in that way. I think Barca will just have too much attacking firepower over 2 legs for Dortmund's inconsistent defense. And finally, we have Leverkusen versus Inter. This is one of the most interesting matchups so far. And again, these two teams have already played each other. Leverkusen pretty much controlled the entire game and won comfortably 1-0. This one is pretty much a coin toss over 2 legs, but I will favor Leverkusen. Inter are always so solid, and they did reach the Champions League final a couple of seasons ago. But I just think Leverkusen are the hungrier team right now. They've still got a pretty new squad gelling together. They've got the star boy in Florian Wirtz. They've got the new star coach in Xabi Alonso in what could be his final season if he makes the move to Real Madrid. And especially after they failed to win the Europa League last season after going unbeaten in every other game, I think they'll just be hungrier for this. And the match will just mean that much more to them. So I do see Leverkusen going through, but it'll be really close. Alright, so our semifinals are set. On the left side, we have Real Madrid versus Liverpool, and on the right side, we have FC Barcelona versus Bayer Leverkusen. Now this is definitely building up to be the first ever El Clasico Champions League final. I'm sure UEFA would absolutely love that for the money, but do I think that'll happen? Well, first let's get into Real Madrid versus Liverpool. Again, these two teams have already played each other this season. Liverpool won pretty comfortably 2-0 at Anfield. Now, head-to-head in the knockouts recently, Real have had the upper hand on Liverpool, and it really is so hard to count Real out in the Champions League. This one is nearly impossible to predict, but I do think it's going to be an absolutely thrilling tie, filled with goals, going back and forth, some kind of crazy comeback, something like that. But if you look at the trends recently, Real Madrid do seem to like taking a little break from the final after winning it, and since they just won it last year, I'm going to go with that pattern repeating. So I think Liverpool will get the revenge over Real Madrid for those past knockout victories, and they'll move on to the final. Now we have Barcelona versus Leverkusen. This is a matchup that I'd be really excited to see. These two sides haven't played each other since 2015. These are two of the most exciting teams in football right now going up against each other. In terms of my prediction though, Barcelona have 120 goals in 39 games, and compare that to Leverkusen's 76 goals in 33 games, I just can't ignore the attacking firepower that Barcelona have. Plus, we've already seen them blow teams like Bayern and Real completely out of the water this season. So yeah, I've got Barcelona going through, but I do think Leverkusen are going to put up a really good fight. So the final is Liverpool versus Barcelona, which is very fitting because these two were the top two teams in the Champions League phase, and by far the best teams of the competition at that stage. Both of them are looking pretty incredible in their respective domestic leagues as well. I will say Barcelona have slipped up more this season than Liverpool have. I'd say Liverpool look a bit more like a solid team, and Barcelona are a bit more unpredictable. I could see Barcelona absolutely smashing Liverpool, or I could see them being really lackluster depending on what kind of Barcelona turns up. But either way, I'm pretty happy with this final prediction. I think this is the final that you make this season. I'd say these are the two teams that have impressed me most this season, and the two teams that when I look back in 5 or 10 years will really define the season. In terms of how the matchup's going to go, I'd give the defensive edge to Liverpool with Alisson in goal, and then the brick walls of Van Dijk and Konate in front of him. But in attack and midfield, it really is a bit of a toss-up. Gravenberch, McAllister, Szoboszlai, and even Curtis Jones have been a really world-class midfield this season. But I could say the same for Barcelona's midfield of Pedri, Olmo, Gavi, Fermin, Casado, Frenkie de Jong, whoever's playing in that midfield just looks incredible. And up front for Liverpool, you have, in my opinion, the best player in the world right now, Mohamed Salah, who I actually just made a video about. Check that out if you're interested. You also have Luis Diaz, then you have the rotation of Cody Gakpo, Diogo Jota, and Darwin Núñez. But for front, Rafinha, Lewandowski, and Lamine Yamal has to be up there for the best front three in the world this season. Maybe you could argue Vinicius, Mbappe, Rodrigo, I don't know, but I would call them about the best front three in the world. It's going to be so tight. So who am I going to go for to lift the Champions League trophy? Well, while I do think that Liverpool are probably the better team than Barcelona right now, I have to consider a few things. Number one, Hansi Flick is a proven manager who's already won the Champions League, while Slot's only final win so far was in the Dutch Cup against NEC, and he lost to Roma in the Europa League final. Number two, Barcelona have already won a trophy this season, absolutely smashing Real Madrid 5-2 in the Supercopa de España final. But number three, it's been exactly a decade since Barcelona last won the Champions League, and that was with this legendary squad. I do think Barcelona are overdue for another Champions League win, and I think this is the year that they get it. Again, while I do think Liverpool are probably the better team this season, this is a one-off match, and I think Barcelona are going to have what it takes with their incredible attacking tactics and all the firepower they have up front. Lewandowski's going to turn up, Lamine Yamal is going to turn up like he did in the Euro final, and Rafinha is going to play an amazing game. And I think since winning the Euro final, Lamine Yamal and Dani Olmo are going to be fired up from that experience, and they're going to propel their team forward to win the Champions League. And the fact that this season they've shown that they can really turn up in these big matches against huge opponents, I think that's going to propel them to win the Champions League. Which is going to mean that Lamine Yamal, before he finishes high school, will have won both the Euros and the Champions League, and not just on the bench either, by starting and playing an absolutely key role in both teams. So yeah, this is my final bracket. This is my prediction. I'm sure so many of you are going to have some disagreements, so let me know those in the comments below. Who do you predict to eventually win the Champions League? And something fun to do with this video will be after the actual Champions League final is played, I'm going to look back at this bracket and we can all just laugh together and see how truly wrong I was. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to Footballers for more videos like this one.